Well, I'm excited to chat with you, Michael, today. Welcome to the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time to join me.
Yeah, Daniel, it's great to be here with you. Thanks for the invite, man. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I know we connected briefly at the Wise Practice Summit last year, and I remember, just listening to you speak on leadership. And I don't remember the full details of what you spoke about, but I remember being, taking that away and like, oh wow, that was a real. I'm glad I was in this session, listening listening to Michael speak. And so, yeah, really excited to just learn from you and be curious, about what you have to share today. And before we kind of get into what we've talked about, the topic for today, why don't you just share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure, sure. Well, I'll give you a little bit of background. I'll go back quite a ways, 20 years ago.
Please do. I
Yeah.
love origin stories and like,
Okay.
how people got to where they are today and why they're doing what they're doing today. So don't
Yeah.
gloss over it. Give us all the details.
Okay, great. Yeah, sounds good. Well, when I was an undergrad, again, 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago now, I had an interest in what's called industrial organizational psychology,
Yeah.
which listeners maybe have heard of, but essentially it's psychology in the workplace. How do teams and individuals perform at their very best? How do they communicate well? How do they lean into good processes? How do good cultures get formed? So that was really interesting to me. So I did the study in undergrad, found a professor to kind of mentor under, and did the internships related to that, graduated, got a job in a corporate setting. And at the
Hmm.
time, I was doing kind of a hybrid role between helping folks get placed in employment into companies that were our clients. And so, as an example, Yamaha was one of our clients then, and so I helped get folks placed there. And then interestingly, it was a lot of leadership coaching, which I didn't realize until years later. But a lot of what would happen, Daniel, is that we'd place these folks into the company, and then it would be kind of managing the dynamics between their internal leaders and
Hmm.
us as the placement service. And so it was a lot of communication, navigation, and conflict, and
Hmm.
addressing issues that came up. We were a little bit of an intermediary, and
Okay.
so yeah, it was really good experience. Did some selling as well in that space, which was a good learning. And ultimately, I thought at the time I'd go back and get a master's or PhD in IO psych, but got inspired to kind of take a deeper dive into the human condition. So I went back and got a master's in counseling, and then eventually a license as a therapist a couple years after that, and lived in the mental health world for quite a while, doing everything from working in the jail system, the hospital system, community mental health. I led teams of therapists in community mental health, did some private practice work. And, after a number of years in that, still had some interest in, teams and cultures and workplace dynamics. And so I
Yeah.
thought, how can I get back to this? And so the bridge that I found back to it was through the EAP industry. And so for a couple years or so, I worked for an EAP company, and that role was also kind of a hybrid role. It was a cross between doing clinical consultation for the companies that were our clients and doing training. And so at that time,
Hmm.
I was traveling the country doing trainings for our company clients on things like communication and team performance and stress management, mental health in the workplace. And that experience really got me fired up to pursue my own business. And I think I was naive enough at the time to like take the leap. And I did. So I moved on from that job and started doing my own thing. And initially I was doing a little bit of therapy and then doing some coaching and training. And
Hmm.
in 2017, we launched our company, Arc Integrated, and that's also when I dropped the therapy hat
Yeah.
and decided to go kind of all in on coaching and leadership development.
Hmm.
And yeah, and it's been going great since. It started off, primarily as me, and then over the years we've built our bench of trainers and facilitators and coaches. We've got about 15 folks on our team now, and they come in to different projects based on necessity. And yeah, it's awesome. We serve companies that range in size from a few dozen employees to some of our clients are Fortune 500 companies. And we're able to
Hmm.
do that because we're working in specific sectors of larger companies. But our ideal size of group that we work with, we say, is between 100 and 2,500 employees. And there's some reasons for that, which I can go into. But let me pause there with the intro and see where you want to go next.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love, like I said, I love hearing like the stories of these are the things that like, life brought my way or I pursued. And then when we kind of see, what you're doing now, like what great experience that first had, the organizational psychology piece and then the private practice, like that, like you're really able to, I assume, from what I know from you and seen, really like lead, coach, and understand, like you said, the human behavior and kind of how that all works together and fits together within organizations and teams. So I think that that's just yeah, it's just always so fascinating to see how life gives us these experiences. We can take those things and turn those into businesses and passions and things. So I'm just inspired is what I'm saying.
Oh man, well I appreciate it. And I'm a big believer that, those of us that have backgrounds in anything related to psychology, there's so much opportunity to pursue outside of like
Yeah,
traditional psychology roles
yeah.
because to your point, it is so relevant. In this
Hmm.
case, psychology, mental health, it's so relevant to effective communication and stress management and
Yeah,
managing conflict and a lot of other things that are relevant to high performing groups, whether that's,
yeah.
a small team, a large team, or even an entire ecosystem of a company.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. Well, I'm excited to get into, what we kind of emailed back and forth a little bit about, what's kind of like on your heart and mind, what are you passionate about lately? And you had this question, and which I think is awesome, is how do I, as a leader, influence the behavior of those I'm leading?
Mhm.
I think, for me, that really just piqued a lot of curiosity, for myself as a leader of a small team. My team is remote, fully remote with our team, and we've got about 8 or 9 folks that work at Private Practice Elevation. I'm also thinking about my wife, who's got a small team, in private practice, especially for those who are listening, about 8 or so therapists. And a lot of the people that we work with are going from that maybe small group practice to scaling, starting to scale up. And so I think that that's a really good question, to be thinking about as we're scaling, as we're adding people to our team, to make sure that we are intentional, in leading. So
Mhm.
when we're thinking about that question, where do we start? How do we
Yeah, we're
how do we
start.
start with that influence? Maybe like let's talk about sort of mindset about we're influencing behavior because I think that we can probably go a million different ways with this. Like I'm thinking about how do we influence while also letting our employees and our team be autonomous, for growth and scale. There's that
Sure.
sort of aspect. So why don't you kind of start us off? Like what first comes to mind for you when you're talking about influence as a leader?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll tell you why that question is interesting to me. We get all sorts of questions from clients. How do I get this, COO bought into the vision? How do we get this team to communicate more effectively with this other team? How do we get our financial person to, be more empathetic? Whatever it is. How do
Hmm.
we get buy-in from our employees? How do we get higher performance or motivation out of people?
Yeah.
Ultimately, Daniel, the reason I'm inspired by the question you ask is because I think all the questions I just gave are really just that one question.
Yeah.
How do I influence the behavior of someone else? That's really the question that's being asked, regardless
Hmm.
of the details within it.
Yeah.
And what I've come to believe in short is that the very best path to influencing behavior is not through the dictating or commanding or demanding of others,
Yeah.
but it starts with the questions that we ask ourselves and
Hmm.
then the questions that we ask other. And that might sound unusual or cliche or maybe obvious, but I would say it doesn't get enough attention as it deserves. This
Hmm.
notion of questioning as a path to influence.
Hmm.
And I've found it to be true over the years that, over time, and some of our clients that we've worked with for years, and they'll often reflect that, oh, the way to get XYZ person to really go in a direction that I want them to go is if I'm more present with them, more present with myself, asking myself, how I'm showing up in this scenario, and actually asking them different questions rather than telling them exactly what I want them to do all the time. Not to say
Yeah.
that, it's not that you're only going to use questions. Certainly we're going to
Right.
tell, we're going to have dialogue and express what we want and where the boundaries are within that. But
Yeah.
yeah, questions are a radically underutilized tool for influence.
Yeah. Can you give us like more examples on that? Like maybe you have like a recent situation with a client and to help us kind of think through like what questions should that leader be asking their team and what questions should they be asking themselves?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I'll give you an example in the world of communication. And
Hmm.
so in the world of communication, there are styles. And
Hmm.
so you might know this already, or your listeners might know it, but a real quick and easy way to think about styles is through an instrument called the disc. Have you ever heard of the disc before?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So the disc is a DISC, the different four different styles. They're pretty accepted as kind of the standard of communication styles.
Hmm.
And so, often conflict that emerges, and I see this all the time with clients as an example, comes from a disconnect between styles, right? The
Hmm.
the the D style, for instance, is all about, directing and results orienting and wanting to win. And the C style is more like analytical and detail oriented and cautious and wants a lot of information. So inherently, those styles are at conflict.
Hmm.
So one of the
Yeah.
things that we'll work with our clients as an example is like, well, first, it requires asking ourselves the question of maybe my style, or is my style the right style? The
Hmm.
answer to that is no. All right, there isn't a right style,
Yeah.
but it requires first that self-reflection that, oh, is there a style that could be different from mine that is also effective and also has blind spots and strengths?
Yeah.
Could it be that perhaps if I flexed a little bit, that I might get better results? So
Hmm.
that this internal reflection needs to happen first. And then secondly, to give you a real example, it might be as simple as if I'm with someone else, asking them, "Hey, what's a way in which I could communicate with you that would make it easier for you to hear me?"
Mm. That's
And
good.
that could be the tonality, the pace. That could be, I prefer email rather than, in person. I prefer text rather than email. I prefer in person rather than, right? It could be modality related. It could
Hmm.
be related to like detail orientation. It
Hmm.
might be, oh, Michael, yeah, could you really give me more information about, what your expectations are so that I know where success is rather
Yeah.
than just telling me the result that you want?
Yeah. Hmm.
And a lot of this can get, resolved. And we've seen this happen with the simple question, in what ways can I communicate with you that would make it easier for you to hear me?
Yeah. I love that question. That's really sparking a lot of inspiration for me because I'm thinking about to like our not only my team but even like our clients that we work
Absolutely.
with.
Yeah.
We set out on some of like the website design projects that we do could take 5, 6 months, and so
Yeah.
communication is really I've seen things break down when communication doesn't work and
Yeah.
we try to systematize as much as we can, but there's also that aspect of some of our clients don't want to communicate a certain way and some want to,
Yeah.
communicate another way. So that's a great question to ask kind of at the outset of
Yeah.
projects, of orientation for new team members, getting down to communication styles and understanding that. I like that.
Yeah. Can I give you a couple more examples? Because I,
Yeah,
I love I
definitely.
love your I love your question. So another example that comes up regularly, and I'm guessing you'll appreciate this. I'm sure you've been in a meeting that's horrible before in your professional career, right?
Yes.
So often that's an interesting kind of nuanced topic that comes up often with our clients is like, how do we meet more effectively? How
Hmm.
do we meet so that we ensure everybody in the room needs to be there? Those that don't need to be there aren't there. How do we
Right.
meet timely? How do we meet so that we're, creating the actions and the follow through that we want? It's a very common topic.
Yeah.
A very simple of many, but one very simple resource for that is when we meet to simply ask the question, uh, if you and I were to sit down, Daniel, and say, hey, Daniel, in our next, actually just did this morning with someone. I said, we had a 30-minute meeting. We're a couple minutes in. And before we got much further, I said, hey, we've got about 25 minutes left. Is there anything that you'd like to set as an intention for our time together so that by the end of the meeting, we make sure that you get exactly what you want out of our time? Anything come to mind?
Mm, that's
Like
good.
super, super simple
Yeah.
intention setting
Yeah.
at the beginning of any meeting through a question can drastically influence the outcome.
Yeah.
So super simple example. Thoughts or comments on that? I want to give you a third example, but any reflections?
Yeah. No, I think that's really powerful. I like that because especially when it's just I always go to, my own experience. So I'm thinking about our, like I said, our larger projects and our clients um and yeah, sometimes we kick off a project, we do onboarding, but instead of just going through some onboarding spiel,
Yeah, yeah,
starting with that intention to make sure that we can still go through our typical onboarding, but we also need to make sure that we are, honoring the new client by really hearing that what's the intention that you want to see happen in this meeting so that we are hitting those points or making it really valuable,
absolutely.
for that meeting.
I love that. It's a great example, and my guess would be that that influence on the client is going to result in them like feeling heard and them maybe engaging
Right.
a little bit more,
Yeah.
maybe leaning in a little bit more, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also too, I'm thinking for obviously my team too as well for those especially when we're meeting for like performance reviews and things like that.
Hmm.
So that again, like you said, they're heard, they're feeling like they're being heard and their
Yeah,
time is being honored and respected and
yeah.
everybody comes away from the meeting feeling like we accomplished what we set out to do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Related to performance reviews, here's a third example of questions for influence. It's a tool called the After Action Review, and it's got three. So have you heard of this before?
No, I
After
haven't.
Action.
No.
So it's three questions. They're in a specific order, and I'm going to give you that order. And the first question is, and these are simple, but what did we do well?
Hmm.
What did we do well? You could use these for meetings as well. The second
Yeah.
question is what did we learn?
Hmm.
And the third question is what will we do differently?
Yeah.
And you could use those with the context of we if you're talking about the group.
Hmm.
Or if you're looking at a performance review and you wanted to make those questions individualized, you just change the we to an I or we to a you. What did
Yeah.
you do well? What did you learn? What did you going to do? What are you going to do differently? And
Yeah.
then that becomes this kind of iterative cycle. The next performance review that you do, you circle back to say, okay, you committed to this thing.
Yeah.
Now, where are you at with that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's those like, those feedback loops and keeping those
Yep.
things in front of you. Because I think I know for myself, sometimes it can get, I can get caught up in okay, it's another, I do 90-day sort of check-ins that are a little bit
Fantastic.
high level, and just like I call them quarterly conversations.
Yeah, I
It's
love
not so much about performance, but it kind of, touches on like, what have you done over the last 90 days and
it.
how can I support you? But I think
Yeah,
that sometimes I get into that cycle, like, okay, it's another quarterly check-in, you kind of
yeah.
check it off, but to have sort of that running list of things that your team member has learned and things that they're implementing that you can follow back up on, say,
Yeah.
okay, you know, last time we spoke about this, have you implemented those lessons you've learned? How can I continue to support you, going forward?
Mhm.
Another place my mind goes to is even
Yeah.
there's those times, with your team where something breaks down
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
things go wrong, and I think those three questions are really great for kind of doing those postmortems of either a situation or a project goes bad or you had an issue with a client or potential client
Mhm.
where a ball is dropped, that sort of thing, and you're calling your team together and instead of pointing fingers, that's very constructive
Absolutely.
to ask those questions. That's kind of where my mind goes.
Yeah, that's spot on. I agree. I think that it's particularly important when there is like a time of chaos or a problem that's emerged to
Yeah.
lead with what did we do well?
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
Because it's already the stakes are already high and people's assumption is already, oh gosh, we're in
Yeah.
trouble or we've really dropped the ball or and
Yeah.
when we're in that state, that physical and mental and emotional state, we
Yeah.
can't think very creatively, right?
Yeah.
There's science to support that. And so when we first look for what's working, it
Yeah.
opens up our ability to realize solutions that maybe
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah,
good.
absolutely. I can give a actual like example. This came up in my
Oh
wife's
yeah.
practice recently where they had a new client, couples in crisis, so like wanting to get in quickly, and they got scheduled with one of the therapists, but the timeline was so short that I guess the communication broke down, and
Sure.
so the therapist didn't show when this new client showed up, and so they
Oh.
were obviously very upset. And
Mhm.
so, that kicks off all these other conversations with, her admin support trying to find somebody to call this client and take care of it, all this stuff. And so I feel like my wife did a really good job leading through that to kind of get the team together. I'm like, okay, what happened? What broke down? And then also my wife kind of went on to like, she's thinking through her company policies and procedures. Like, okay, there needs to be a procedure in place. There needs to be a policy, like how we might not be the private practice that's going to take people the same day, especially if someone's in crisis. That's really not their ideal client, honestly,
Yeah.
but she doesn't have a policy in place. But now
Mm.
she can come back to say, okay, maybe within 48 hours, we send them a reference to a different practice, a different therapist, and
Yeah.
that gives them time to coordinate with the team, And so
Yeah.
instead of pointing the finger of just, hey, you dropped the ball, you can't do that, obviously there's conversations going on with her team, but it's more of, okay, for the future, how do we move forward? Because there's always going to be issues and balls dropped and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that response. I think that's wonderful. I might refer to that as a culture making moment.
Oh, yes.
You
I like
know,
that.
and I say that because, culture is built every day. Workplace culture is built every day through the conversations, interactions,
Yeah.
opinions shared, all of that. But what I've come to believe and learn is that it's really emphasized during moments of, quote unquote failure, and
Mm. Yeah.
how we choose to respond to that is really planting the flag culturally around our
Yeah.
identity. And
Yeah.
so I love your example because what I hear you say is that, like, we're going to learn from failure and we're not going to
Hmm.
shame or blame.
Yeah.
We're going to say, okay, well, what can we learn? What can we do differently? How can we prevent this in the future? And that
Yeah.
really says something in my experience to employees. And again, it's a marker of a cultural identity. So yeah, great
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, we can kind of tie that back to, back to our original question of like, how do I influence those I'm leading? And I
Yeah.
think culture can be can really be a big piece to that. And I think that's one
Mm.
thing that I've tried to do in my own culture, to be in private practice elevation, to not point blame and to like make
Yeah.
it a safe place for failure. Because I feel like, people will be more open to receiving constructive criticism
Yeah.
when they aren't, in that sort of defensive mode. Like, oh, I screwed up.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? My manager and my boss is going to come at me.
Yeah.
But instead to be like, yeah, I messed up and I'm going to own this. And okay, let's have a conversation about how we're going to work together so this doesn't happen again, but also just reinforce who you are and what you do in this business and in this team.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's an important pivotal moment that I think isn't recognized enough. So it sounds like you're doing some of that. So great job.
Trying. It's not always perfect, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me curious, like, related to this topic of influence, to make it real, is there anything in your business that, you have a current question about around how to influence
Mm.
the situation or behavior? If there's something real for you, I'd be
Oh,
happy to
oh, we're gonna get
field a real
live
question.
live coaching here. Okay, I
Yeah,
love
if you want.
it. Well, I think I brought up kind of as we were kind of getting this conversation started. That idea of autonomy with your team and kind of
Uh-huh.
balancing that tension with influence and to kind of make it personal. There's plenty of times where we've created processes, those processes have kind of grown out of my own, whatever it is. I'm coming up on 10 years in this business of, just of doing these projects and making sure that clients feel, well taken care and well communicated to, and so we have those processes there, but then sometimes they're not followed, or I find myself
Yeah.
repeating like, well, this has to happen. This is our process,
Mhm.
you know? And so like I want
Yep.
my team to be autonomous
Yep.
and continue to deliver on their own. They know exactly what to do. And so yeah, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts around that sort of that tension.
Yeah.
So I don't find myself, to kind of tie it to what we were just talking about, to be like, you're supposed to do this, or you're supposed to do this, and like, and not make it about what you're doing wrong, but yeah, I want to strengthen those muscles of going through our process that's been built on kind of the results and also the culture of the product and the service that we're trying to provide.
Yeah, yeah. I actually I'm looking over here on another screen because there's a visual that I think might be interesting to show you.
Oh,
Can I
great.
show you?
Yeah, yeah. Let's
Cool.
turn on the sharing here, and then if folks are listening, we'll have this on YouTube so they can find it later too.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. So, I'm going to show you as I'm pulling this up, what this is called the success path. And I'm going to bear with me here.
Sure.
I want to blow it up and make it easy to read. Here we go. Okay. All right. I'm going to share my screen here.
Cool.
So what you're going to see is a visual that has kind
Yep.
of two directions to it, and a direction going kind of up to the right for those that are listening, and at the
Hmm.
at the bottom of that is now. So if you have an employee, our recommendation is always that there is clarity, ideally in a visual tool of some kind, around what's expected of them and what is opportunistic. So in this
Hmm.
sample, what we have are these little dots that represent milestones, and then these larger dots that represent, bigger opportunities. So in this example, you've got things like promotion, title change, leadership opportunity. These are just examples, though. Every business is going to look different around what's opportunistic as they
Right.
continue to perform really well.
Hmm.
And so this is often sometimes it's talked about in businesses. Oftentimes, or sometimes there's not a visual for it though. And what we find is that presenting a visual for people can really helpful. These
Hmm.
milestones that we're talking about are what are the behavioral things that they need to represent? What are the tasks that they need to complete? What are the competencies they need to develop in order to reach, each of these opportunities, we'll call them.
Yeah.
So this is the first half of this. The second half is also directional, but the other direction. So, and you could think about it, the difference between now and if we were to exit, if we were to say, you know what, this is no longer a fit. What
Hmm.
is the delta? What's the difference between that? And these are
Yeah.
things like the first write-up, the second write-up, a performance improvement plan. And you know what? If we get it through all that and we're still not seeing performance, then sorry, we're going to have to part ways.
Yeah.
This also needs to be, in our experience, really fleshed out and developed in such a way where any given employee can see, okay, here's how I'm hitting the marks, here's how I'm not. And then the hardest part, Daniel, and I'm guessing you'll attest to this as well, is holding them to that accountability.
Yeah. Hmm.
Right. And
Hmm.
so I'll stop sharing for a second. So when you ask about like the balance, between autonomy
Yeah.
and continuing to follow up with them, where my mind goes is the success path clear?
Yeah.
Is there clarity around what's available to them? And is there
Hmm.
clarity around how they're going to be held accountable? And then lastly, most importantly, are they being held accountable? And are those opportunities being given if they're reaching the success that you're saying they need to get to?
Yeah, I think probably as I'm looking at that and thinking about this, my mind goes straight to before you even said the word clarity. That was where my mind went of just being clear on what is our process. I've gone through, seeing that illustration there. I've gone through that process of
Yeah.
exiting somebody and kind of going through that performance improvement plan and
Awesome.
trying those things. So I have walked through those. But
Okay.
do my other employees understand that that's our process and how and what will happen at that point? The answer would be no, And
Okay.
so
Okay.
I think that would be my starting point is creating that clarity and understanding for myself what needs to happen. And then also obviously communicating that and making that clear probably in those quarterly check-ins or those performance reviews so that people
Sure.
are on board and in line with what we're doing. Another piece that comes to mind too is I'm working on our sort of employee handbook, like all of our
Mm.
processes and
Yeah.
policies to get those all in one place. So
Awesome.
again, create that clarity and communicate around something, like point people back to it. Because I think for so long it's just been like, yeah, this is just what we do and this is what's going to happen. But like you could say it once, but then kind of forget your own process. And then
Sure.
obviously like your team is they're not in your brain and they're not thinking about your processes. They're trying to work.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And that's, that is a challenge. We see that too, like the constant kind of reminding of expectations and opportunity. And I think that of course can also be scaled, right? So that it's not totally dependent upon, who's leading and that
Yeah.
there are other leaders that are also, kind of proselytizing that
Yeah.
those
Hmm.
expectations. The other, can I show you another visual that you might
Yeah,
find?
absolutely. Yeah.
This
That's
is
great.
another tool that we'll use that is related to your question about autonomy. And so
Hmm.
this one's called a communication map. And it's essentially an XY axis for those that are listening. And the idea is that on one axis, you've got the level of seriousness of an issue.
Hmm.
And on the other axis, you've got the level of frequency of check-in and the level of detail. And that those numbers should match, right? So meaning if something is really serious, let's say it's a 9 out of 10,
Hmm.
then the frequency of detail, or sorry, the frequency of meeting and the level of detail given should also be a 9 out of 10. And so that, that might mean that you're meeting with them every day or three times a week, and the
Yeah.
detail is super, super granular. But the other part that's important is that, and you'll see this arrow kind of going down to zero on both axes. Zero is total autonomy, meaning it's not serious anymore, and we don't need to have frequent meetings, and we don't
Yeah.
need to give a lot of detail. That's the
Hmm.
goal for everybody,
Yeah.
right? That's the goal for the leader, and it's the goal for the autonomy or the goal for the employee. And that's really
Hmm.
important to communicate that when we're in a time of seriousness and we're meeting all the time, we're given all this detail, it's important to communicate that, hey, the goal here for both of us is not that we stay here. It's
Yeah.
that we get to total autonomy. And that can be leveraged
Yeah.
by the delivery of detailed expectation frequent meeting, and then over time that kind of falls down, right? Maybe it moves from every day to every other day to once a week to once a month, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's our communication map. Yeah, probably makes sense as you see it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something too that for me it kind of fluctuates through different seasons or different issues that may come up where maybe you're seeing a frequent mistake or a process
Yeah.
breakdown or something like that. Also, especially too with like onboarding new team
Mm,
members, I find would love to just hire somebody and be like, run with it. But like if
sure.
you just do that, sometimes you'll run into some other issues. And so it's part of that sort of process of creating culture, setting expectations. So, I'll have weekly meetings maybe with a new hire that like, okay, I feel like you're getting it. Let's go down to once a week,
Yeah.
or maybe once a month. I mean, sorry, every 2 weeks, then once a month, and you kind of
Sure.
pull it back. And so there has certainly been times where there's been maybe repetitive breakdowns that I've
Mm,
seen or like, hey, we're receiving this sort of negative feedback from a client again, like what we need to meet a little more often to talk about this so that we can solve this issue and sort of set a new course for this. So, yeah, that makes sense.
that's awesome, man. Yeah, it sounds like you're doing a lot of really good practices.
Yeah, trying. It's a constant, man, the leadership, it is a constant learning piece, and I don't think I'll ever stop learning. And I feel like, Michael, we could certainly talk all day, and this has really been awesome. I know we got to kind of land the plane of our time.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, is there any sort of last things you want to leave with listeners? We've kind of talked through a lot here, about
Sure.
influencing your team And so is there maybe sort of one sort of key piece that, if you could take this away from our conversation that you'd be happy if listeners got that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can I'll leave maybe a quote and then there's maybe a couple giveaways that might be interesting too.
Great.
The quote is simple, although I find it to be powerful, which is unconscious leaders control and conscious leaders inquire.
Mm,
And so when we think about where this is maybe an opportunity where we might fall on a spectrum between control being on one side and being inquisitive or inquiring on the other
yeah.
side. I think, maybe obviously we ideally want to be on that curious and inquisitive side. And I think that's an important question for all of us leaders to always ask ourselves, like, how
Yeah.
much am I controlling? How much am I being curious?
Yeah, that's really good. You can do a whole podcast episode on that because when we find ourselves in those types of control, that points to all these different things of, okay, what's going on within me?
Yeah.
Where's my lack or my fears that's showing up in this way? Anyway, I don't want to go
Yeah.
down that rabbit hole.
Exactly. Yeah. It's some cascading things.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
That's cool.
what resources do you have, giveaways and things
Sure.
that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, there's a free quiz that folks might find interesting. It's a leadership quiz. Takes like 3 to 5 minutes. And it's our website, which is arcintegrated.com/quiz. And if you take that, you'll get immediately a free kind of report around how you're doing as a leader and some opportunities that you might have.
Cool.
It'll also automatically kind of sign folks up for our email list. If that's of interest, we send information around leadership, team, and culture performance about once a month. And yeah, obviously you could take the quiz and unsubscribe too, and that's also good. And
Awesome.
so yeah, so that's one resource. And then a second resource is we run an intensive leadership retreat in Costa Rica once a year.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a week long. It's an all-inclusive experience. We have about a dozen folks there from varying sized companies, and it's a real deep dive into all things leadership development and workplace performance. And so that is happening in February, and there is a discount that's available, I think, until the end of August.
Okay.
And if people are curious, they can go to clquest.com, which stands for consciousleadersquest.com.
Awesome.
I
All
can give
right.
you all that for the show notes too.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. I'm not totally sure on the timing of this episode going live, but I'm sure you'll continue to do those retreats and people
Yeah,
can certainly check those out. So thank you so
absolutely.
much for your time, Michael. You've been really generous and really just, diving into some of these things. And I love your curiosity and the questions you're asking me. I felt like I was being interviewed, which is also just fun. And yeah, just really enjoyed my time with you.
Oh man, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, thanks for your willingness to dialogue and field some questions. And yeah, thanks for the invite. It was a lot of fun.